I don't think I'm going to set a goal to read 100 books next year. Hello friends. Today's video is going to be about my favorite books that I read this past year. I read 100 books this past year. What I want to do is go through my top 10 favorites. Something to note is I haven't put these in order of like my least to most favorite or anything like that. I really went through and did them chronologically to when I read them. And the other thing that's maybe a little misleading about the title of this video, I listened to a lot of audiobooks. So that is really a big part of how I can read 100 books in a year. I would not be able to get that done if I was physically turning every single page, because I do plenty of this stuff while I'm multitasking, working out, doing chores, whatever. So that's really how I've accomplished reading 100 books this year. I've gathered my top 10 books for the year, and I'm going to go through why I think you should read each of them. The first book I want to talk about is called Working: Researching, Interviewing, and Writing by Robert A. Caro. This is a book about a man fully dedicated to his craft. If you want to hear about the person doing the most, going to almost the biggest extreme on the thing that he feels passionate about, like a man driven by story and justice and really trying to show the impact of political power. Robert is most famous for his book called The Power Broker, a book I have not read, and his other book series is about Lyndon Johnson. Again, haven't read those either. They're very long, they're very in-depth. The way I heard them described was they're not the most perfect writing of all time, but what he does better than anyone is he is the most thorough. He dives in deep, way more than anyone else. That's very much what this book is about. It is him talking about his process, talking about how he writes, talking about how he researches. The thing that really stood out to me is his philosophy called turn every page. So when he looks into, when he's investigating something, when he's looking through old documents, he literally goes through every single page. He leaves no stone unturned in order to get the full picture and really, really grasp the full context around this historical event that was happening, the story of this person's life that he's digging into. He just is more thorough than anyone I've ever heard diving into these topics. And of course, that makes his work incredibly long, and his research process, basically takes him 10 years to complete a book or something like that. And yes, I think that might not be exactly how I want to approach things, but I just loved that commitment and the fact that so much of that was driven by his need to really tell a human story, to really give the full picture, to make sure he wasn't missing something important. I've just never heard anyone really talk about their work like that. I think part of the reason I latched onto this book so strongly was because this is just the opposite approach of so much media that we see and consume today. His style of working, his style of writing is the opposite of TikTok or Reels or something. These short, intense, very often surface level, flashy things that are in your face and out of your head 2 seconds later, and also just have almost no staying power. And I just found this to be the most opposite approach to that. This dense, long, super investigative process, someone who is super driven by justice and passion and telling the whole truth to the best of his ability, and then devoting, years and years and years in order to make that happen. That is the opposite of what we mostly come across today. So I found that to just be a really refreshing thing to read about someone who has that approach, and I kind of want to learn and take that into my own work. So, Working. Give it a shot. The next book that I want to talk about is called Die With Zero: Getting All You Can From Your Money and Your Life by Bill Perkins. I have to say that when you read a lot about finance and personal finance and sort of that self-help personal finance genre, you definitely read a lot of things from like rich guys with opinions. It can be hard to read books from super privileged people talking about money, and I get that. So if that's something that's like just off-putting to you or like not the place you want to start, fair enough. I think this book is good for someone who wants to be more intentional with their finances. The point that he makes is about spending strategically throughout your life, and this idea of not waiting to do everything or pursue certain things until you are retired. He talks about throwing a like really crazy birthday party for himself, but also for his friends and loved ones. And I think it was his 50th, maybe something like that. But he talks about this idea of like, when am I going to have a better time to gather all these people that I care about together for a special important thing, and to really like go all out, like have this big crazy lavish moment where I like spend on the people that I love when I am healthy enough to appreciate it. He picked this specific birthday because he realized like realistically, like I will probably be too old or maybe not capable of doing this exact thing that I want to do, 10 years from now. I found this idea of trying to spend your money strategically throughout your life and not just think that someday will come and someday when you're retired, you'll be able to do all the things you want to do. You'll be able to, give to other people the way you want to give. You'll be able to live the life you want to live when you're retired someday. He sort of makes a point that you might not get that. And there are also a lot of trade-offs to waiting for a very long time to when, you're much, much older, that there are strategic points to really invest in yourself and invest in other parts of your life. Maybe this is like a very American thing, but we're really taught to sort of like save up for retirement, do everything like perfectly, and prepare to live your real life like after you're retired. And the point that he makes is that nothing is guaranteed, and you might not have the health that you think you will have in order to do those things when you're older. And I'm not saying, and I don't think he says this either, like that means you should just go crazy, spend whatever, not think about your future in any way. He's just saying that like there is a point in time throughout every person's life that is sort of the optimal time to invest in yourself, invest in those around you, your community, your loved ones, and that you shouldn't be waiting until you're retired to do everything. You shouldn't be waiting to donate to things that you care about when you're dead. I've just never heard anyone really talk about money this way, especially since I have read so many books about personal finance. They're all not all of them, but a lot of them are just really focused on this idea of like doing all the right things and just saving. Don't spend on anything, give up your coffee. Don't do anything fun or interesting or lavish in any way, because saving is the only like correct thing to do. And he doesn't say like don't save, but what he is getting into is like deploy this money at the right time, because this money is meant to help other people, both yourself and your loved ones and your community. And this is definitely not the most like delightful, fun topic of all time, but I think a lot about personal finance, and I think a lot about intentional saving and spending and all that stuff. And this just was one of the first things I've read in a while that changed my perspective on that. And it caused me to change some decisions that I made about spending money and spending time even as well. If you're someone who's interested in personal finance and wants to think more about using your money intentionally and using it for the best purpose possible while you're still around, I think this is a really interesting book, and it definitely affected my personal philosophy about all of those things. So that is Die With Zero. And now let's go on to the next one. So the next book that I want to talk about is called actually by Lindy West. And I am a big fan of Lindy West. I have seen her live before, and I have read, I think, everything she's written. All of her books anyway. And I love reading feminist books in general. This is not one of those, by the way. I mean, and there is some of that in there in the sense of like, that is the person that she is. That's how the perspective that she writes from. But this is really a silly little book about movie reviews. She talks about how she has written a lot of serious books recently, and it was nice to just write something that's like fun and goofy and not that serious at all. And that's exactly what this book is. These are movie reviews by Lindy that talk about mostly older movies that she's watching, either rewatching or watching for the first time, and her opinions on them. This is the most unserious book ever. You know, lots of like toilet humor, lots of just very dumb jokes, lots of her gushing and being obsessed with certain things or certain actors or certain parts of movies that are like either fantastic or just so terrible that they're actually fantastic. Any book that gets me to laugh out loud in public just always gets a big thumbs up from me. Lindy always makes me laugh, and the way she reads the audiobook is also fantastic. If you're someone who's read a lot of feminist literature or read other work by feminist writers, and is definitely feeling a bit sad about the state of the world, I found this to be a bit of like a balm for that. You know, like the fact that this is a person who has written about very serious topics and then can turn around and say, you know what, it's okay to write about dumb things. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to like have a silly little good time. Not everything has to be so intense. And like we need those moments of levity to kind of balance out the tough things that we're going through. And that's kind of a serious note to end on. If you need a laugh, if you need to read something dumb, if you are a person who enjoys watching movies that are probably a couple decades old, this will be great for you. The next book I want to talk about is Gideon the Ninth, and this is where I can tell you a little bit about the fact that I love a fantasy series, and I've been obsessed with reading fantasy almost my entire life. The like shortest way I can describe this book is lesbian necromancers in space. And that's how it was described to me, which was very confusing. Because obviously you're like, what does that even mean? But it is very accurate. I think the person I would want to recommend this book to is, you know, someone who enjoys fantasy, someone who is down with like a bit of mystery, a bit of silliness. It's definitely a book that's written in a more like modern style, although it is very fantasy based. You know, there's sword fighting and magic and all that fun stuff. But the way it's written, the way people talk to each other is very modern and sarcastic. I read more than just Gideon. I read all 3 of the books in this series this year, but I picked this one to talk about because I just love the character Gideon the most. Her personality, the way it plays out in this world, her sense of humor, I really enjoyed a lot. Part of the fun of these books is like there's a mystery, there's things you're trying to figure out, and it can be kind of confusing. And at first, I didn't really like understand what was going on, and I had a hard time grasping the world, but just like stick with it because it's totally worth it. I would say that's very true with the other books as well, and they are way more extreme. You're confused like for most of the book. If that's something that bothers you, maybe skip this one. But if you're someone who can kind of like hang in there, and if you like the tone, if you kind of get into the characters, like it's just well worth it. If you're someone who likes your fantasy series a little bit out there, maybe heavy on the mystery, and you like a bit of a mix of like lighthearted and serious tone, if you love women being awkwardly flirty with each other, cannot recommend this more. I had a great time, and there are more books coming as far as I know, so I'm looking forward to reading the next ones in the series. So I highly recommend Gideon the Ninth if you are a fantasy lover. And if you're also someone who's looking for a longer series you can like sink your teeth into for a while, this one's a good one to get started with. The next book I want to talk about that I read this past year was the book called Tiny Habits: The Small Changes That Change Everything. This is really almost like, I think, more useful version of the book Atomic Habits. I really enjoyed reading Atomic Habits back when I read it. But as far as like the impact it's had on my life, I would not say it's like radically improved some of the issues I had with productivity or other things I wanted to improve with my life. I would say it gave me like a good frame to think about things for sure, but I don't think it had a lot of like concrete impact on the improvements. I would not say that that is the case with Tiny Habits. My life is different now because I read this book. And the reason that is because it's like a lot more concrete and like how you actually change a habit, how you actually build that into your life and get yourself to do it again and again. And I think with a lot of self-help books, people will probably sometimes read this and go like, oh, this is so obvious. But I don't know, it wasn't obvious to me. So I found the way Tiny Habits really breaks down how a habit works and how to get yourself to change a habit or build one in to your routine. I found that to be extremely helpful. There's like a lot of little diagrams. This is a big thing that it got me to change. I mean, there's other things, but like this one was a big one for me. I was a really bad flosser before I read this book. I like could not get myself to floss. I found it to be super annoying. I mean, I still don't think it's fun, but like I knew I needed to floss. I knew I needed to floss, like, you know, every time I brush my teeth. But I like couldn't get myself to do it. I couldn't get myself to do it. And this book changed that. I have flossed more in this past year than I probably have in several years combined prior to this one, which is terribly embarrassing. My dental health is genuinely significantly improved this past year because I read this book. The thing that's different about this book is it gets into like how to actually get yourself to change, and it also really drills down on the importance of the fact that any big change, any real change in our lives, like needs to be very tiny to begin with. That this hurdle of like becoming a new person overnight, doing a big drastic 180 from the type of person you are now, like that is very, very hard, and that people put the bar like way too high. You probably need to scale back your goals into being much, much tinier to like get yourself to actually do them. So, you know, it's that idea of like reading one sentence of a book that you've been meaning to get to, or reading one page, like make that bar lower. And the other part of that is this idea of like instantly rewarding yourself for the behavior that you want to do. There's this pretty long section where he talks about that everyone has their own ways of patting themselves on the back or like giving themselves some credit for something that they did that they're proud of. And it looks different for everyone. And he talks about how to like identify that for yourself. And that was a really big part of the change that I was able to make. Was I, as cheesy as it was, like found a way to congratulate myself for flossing. But the fact that I did that, you know, it got me to floss. It got me to floss. And now it is a part of my routine. The lighting is going to be really different now and probably a lot worse. So I'm sorry about that. My video is paying the price of ugliness. I think this is honestly a good read for anyone who is interested in making improvements in their life, whatever those happen to be. And what's nice about this too is it's super broad. Like it can be applied to anything. If I have to pick, I would recommend this book over Atomic Habits. But I think like this book as like a supplement. I think it's very helpful to have read both. And if you're someone who liked Atomic Habits, I think this is like the best like next step kind of thing to read. If you liked Atomic Habits, read Tiny Habits, it's better. Within the nonfiction reading that I do, there's like a good chunk that falls under the category of like business books. And that's like pretty embarrassing. The reason that I have gone out of my way to read so many of them is because I've been working for myself, both full-time and part-time for like 5 or 6 years now. And there is just like a whole new perspective that you have when you start working for yourself. You know, you genuinely run into these problems, or you just start to understand all these gaps in your knowledge. And reading business books is a great way to kind of give yourself that next stage of education. I know that in order to keep working for myself, which is something that I'm very passionate about, I need to get a lot better. I need to up my game and understand, you know, how can I best set both myself up for success and the clients that I work with for success. The book is called Blue Ocean Strategy: How to Create Uncontested Market Space and Make the Competition Irrelevant. The whole theory of this book is really like this idea of when you're a business and you're pursuing a market, you're making a product, most people stay in the red oceans, which are the already established markets that are out there. You know, you have the thing that you do and all your competitors in this red ocean. And the idea of the blue ocean is a place where there are no competitors. You're making something unique. You're creating your own market. You're really like blazing the trail for a totally new thing that people don't know that they actually want. And that is really related to a very frustrating conversation I have a lot, and I've had a lot over my career, about branding. And so that's really the lens that I was looking at this book through. So many people come to someone like me looking for branding help. They know they need something different. They're getting like eaten alive by their competitors. They want to change. And then, you know, when I sort of come forward with this new blue ocean, this more risky way to be, this new point of view they can take and run with and really own and put themselves in a totally different category where they're not competing in the same way they have been before. They can't make that leap sort of from the red ocean to the blue ocean. That is a thing that I've run up against a lot. I really looked at this through a branding lens and as a tool to help have conversations with clients and get them to do things that feel a bit more risky, that often they want to do, but they are just so terrified of change, and they're terrified of stepping out of the lane that everyone else is in. I liked having this book as like a way to think about this problem that I run into in my work, and how to hopefully convince clients to like make that scary, risky leap. I think I would like to recommend this to other brand people like me, because I would be really curious if they kind of got the same reading of it as I did, and if they've encountered this within the space. So that is Blue Ocean Strategy. On to the next one. The next book on the list is called Unreasonable Hospitality: The Remarkable Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. This book is another business book, but this one's actually a lot more of an enjoyable read. It's got a lot more of like an emotional arc to it. There's like 2 reasons I really love this. And one is just like a personal fascination with the restaurant scene in New York City. Over the years, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading books that describe the high-end restaurant food scene in New York. And this book very much goes into that. Maybe there's just like a Danny Meyer obsession somewhere in my reading. The writer was the manager of the front of house of a very high-end New York restaurant. And it's about their story of becoming the best restaurant in the world. This is like a form of artistry that I do not do professionally, so it's interesting to hear like that perspective from someone else. It's like not what I do, but it is close enough. So hearing someone talk about it from a slightly different angle is really interesting to me. And there's just something about people speaking so high stakes about eating food that is like, I don't know, very entertaining. This idea of unreasonable hospitality really struck a chord with me. How can you really go above and beyond to treat the people that you're working with and really anticipate their needs and have this level of care and attention to your sort of client or, customer or whatever. And obviously within this book, he's really talking about, the people eating at the restaurant. I love trying to have a moment of appreciation and like really showing people how much I care for them. I just genuinely love that in my normal life. And I've never really thought about applying that to like my work and my clients. Obviously you're not just gonna like be super gushy and mushy necessarily, but there's a way to have a real genuine connection and really go above and beyond in a bit of more of an emotional way that I've never really heard people talk about in a business context. There's this level of the way him and his team think about the guests at their restaurant where they're trying to like do something extra special. They're paying attention. And then when they sort of spot this moment to do something a little above and beyond, a little bit fun, a little bit magical, like they do it and they just go for it. Why couldn't I apply that same method, to clients? Why couldn't I kind of try to really lean in and pay attention and have a more genuine connection with them? I think that's just a really exciting, interesting way to think about, the clients that I work with. And it's not really something I've done before. How can I have fun with that process? Can I do something unexpected that will really like make their day better? And I just thought that, building something great with this attitude of giving was just a really cool way to approach your work. We all have to have jobs, and if we can approach them in this way that's giving and creative and genuine, it's just like, isn't that going to be so much better? I really think this book would be great for someone who's just genuinely interested in the restaurant scene, especially the New York restaurant scene, and also people looking to have like a slightly different perspective on the work that they do. I found it helpful for me, so let me know if you find it to be helpful for you. The next book that we're going to talk about is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy series. I have just been totally blown away by the Broken Earth trilogy series. I really think it's just one of the best things I've read in a very long time. And this book is the final book in the series. And while I'm not going to go into, the plot too much, other than the very basic premise of, this is a world where there are people that have essentially like tectonic earth powers where they can affect the land and they can, stop earthquakes or start earthquakes. It's about characters that have this ability and the world that they're in. And in this final book, it just really brings home the entire trilogy. And the reason I want to talk about it so badly, the reason that I just like want to push this whole trilogy on everyone is just the world building was insane. I just have not read anything that good in a very long time. I've just been shocked by how good the writing was, because I have read a lot of other fantasy in the past year or so, and man, this book just like kicks all of their butts. It's just so much better. It's emotional, it's so real, it feels so real. And then on top of that, the conversation that this book has about prejudice, about climate change. There's just a lot of interesting things that she explores in this space. If you've ever read Cormac McCarthy's The Road, I really feel like that was the thing I was thinking about throughout the entire series. And that whole like apocalyptic feel world and the way people act within that apocalyptic world. It felt very real, and it was an enjoyable read, even though it was so heavy at times. I think it's hard to really like stick the landing with a lot of series, you know. You can often feel like the middle book is weak, or, you know, the ending didn't quite get where you want. And there's just something about the way she managed to write everything. Like, I was pretty pleased by how all that went. If you're a fantasy reader and you have not read the Broken Earth trilogy series, start out with the 5th season, of course, and follow through to the Stone Sky. I cannot recommend it more. The next book that I wanted to talk about is called The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. This is actually a book that I saw all the time, like on the library shelf as a child. And I read a ton of fantasy back then. I was obsessed with fantasy books, and I just never read it. I think maybe I even tried to read it at first and like didn't get into it or something. I don't know why I didn't read it, but I didn't. And I finally got around to it this year. And I am just kicking myself for the fact that I did not pick this up sooner. I can't believe it took me basically almost my entire life to read this book. I thought The Golden Compass was just delightful. It's obviously, you know, geared towards children. It's very much like a children's adventure story, a children's fairy tale. But I did not find that to be off-putting as an adult. It doesn't feel dumbed down or anything. It sort of like just brought me back to that feeling of being a kid where, you know, anything can happen. I think what I really liked about this book was that it felt so fairy tale-esque to me, and it does not steer away from darkness. There's some really like sad and, you know, intense things that happen to this little girl and happen around her, and things that she encounters. Like, it's very serious, even though at the same time it is still very like childlike. I think what I'd be really interested to find is maybe some more books, but like especially fantasy series that were written a while ago that I haven't gotten around to, maybe haven't even heard of yet, and I would love to like learn more about those and maybe, you know, give those a try. If you're looking for a fun adventure that captures like a really great childlike spirit and puts you into a wonderful fantasy world, then I highly recommend it. So the last book that I want to talk about is called Someday is Today, 22 Simple Actionable Ways to Propel Your Creative Life. And this one is, again, another like self-help book. His primary, you know, creative pursuit is writing and storytelling. Sometimes someone writes a book and it feels very targeted at you. It feels very targeted to your current situation, and it feels very specific to your personality. And this was one of those books. You can probably see a theme in a lot of the books that I've talked about, is he's talking about his creative process, and he's talking about how to actually like move the ball forward in the creative work you want to do. Like, actually make real progress, actually get projects completed, actually make things that you want to make. The thing that resonated with me so much and felt like the kick in the pants that I needed was this idea that like, if you keep waiting around for the perfect time to make something, and if you keep letting your, you know, perfectionism get in the way of the creative work you want to do, it's never going to happen. Like, you have to start now, and you have to, you know, get over that fear that you have of making things and failing. And man, did I really need to hear that. I guess it's been a lot easier for me to do creative pursuit within my past jobs and, you know, my freelance career. But when it comes to just making whatever things I want to make, I've wasted a lot of time just not doing it. And even though I sort of know this on some level, I have been way too worried about the fact that I'm a beginner and I'm gonna make a lot of bad things. And this book just really brought that into focus and just said, you know, you are gonna make bad things, and that's fine. The people that I want to push this on are just people that have a creative dream, or like any dream really. It doesn't have to be artistic in nature, but if you're someone who has been thinking or talking about doing or making something, and you've been talking about it for years, like, man, could this book be useful for you? The whole title of the book, Someday is Today, like, someday needs to be now. You really have to get started now. And that urgency really comes through. And yes, maybe he's a little over the top in some ways, but there's something about someone being so extreme about it to really show you that you have a lot of room to improve on your procrastination and your self-consciousness about the work that you're doing. Along with the book Tiny Habits, this book has actively changed like what I'm doing day to day and actually like getting me to make real progress. I wouldn't say that like, you know, since I read this book, it's like my creative pursuits are all going so perfectly and so well. They're not, but they have improved, and I'm making real tiny progress like week by week on them. And this book really made an impact to just get me over that fear of getting started. So if you're someone who is a creative and you really need that extra push to get moving, and if a conversation around productivity and really pushing yourself to get over the preciousness of making creative work, if that feels like something you need to hear, I highly recommend this book. So that is my list of 10 books out of the 100 books that I read this year that just felt the most urgent to share. I know I said I wasn't ranking anything, and I'm not, but I have a book that really stood out as the unexpected winner of most impactful book on my life this year. And it is not going to be what you think. It was a book that was gifted to me that I did not want to read, that I thought was like going to be kind of cheesy or like, I don't know, I thought it was like above it or something. I don't know. The book that is my bonus most personally impactful book of the year is called A Practical Wedding: Creative Ideas for a Beautiful, Affordable, and Meaningful Celebration by Meg Keane. Yeah, that was my most impactful book of the year. Obviously, this was only relevant to someone who's getting married. I got married this year and I really hated the planning process. I found it stressful, and I found it like both just a huge like drain on my time and emotions, and it was also stressful for me and my partner, and then stressful for my friends and family. It felt really hard to juggle all the expectations. I really did not like this process, and I had been complaining to my friend about it, and she gave me this book for Christmas. I did not get around to it. I was like, oh, I don't want to read this book about weddings. Like, I already don't like this enough. Like, I don't need to like read a book about it. But man, am I kicking myself for not having read it sooner. It would have saved me a lot of time and emotional energy, and it would have saved us money. It would have prevented fights. This book ended up changing my decision and like what my partner and I ended up doing. We changed our wedding plans, and we really restructured the whole thing into something that ended up being a bit different from what people do. And we're really happy with how everything went. This book also changed, like, it changed how much money that we spent. It changed, like, who invited. It changed, like, how we did everything, because it reframed the way I thought about it. I should have trusted my friend. She knew. So I really should have read this book sooner. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. I have let people borrow my copy of this book when they've gotten engaged, because I just wish that I had read it sooner. So I'm not even sure which friend I have like it loaned out to at the moment, because I've tried pushing it on so many people. So if you're someone who's getting married and you are not a person who has been dreaming of your wedding day since you were a kid, that was not me. I never thought about it at all. I found this to just be a great, like, almost like wedding planning therapy. I highly recommend it just to help figure out what you actually really want to do and not let societal expectations dictate that. Might save you a lot of mental anguish. The actual secret reason I really wanted to do this video is to really dive into the idea of why I don't think I'm going to set a goal to read 100 books next year. Setting a goal to read 100 books this past year, I think was actually really counterproductive to what I want to get out of my reading. And I will not be setting that same goal this coming year. I really like tracking my reading. And in a lot of ways, I like Goodreads. I think it's pretty useful for what I'm trying to do. But there was something about the Goodreads like tracker that made me make choices that I think just weren't actually helpful to what I want to get out of reading. You know, I want to learn, I want to be entertained, I want to have fun. This really put some sort of unnecessary pressure on my reading. It made me read too fast. It made me like not really take things in properly. Like I should have slowed down and really tried to understand or learn things more thoroughly. It also made me hesitant to like DNF books that I wasn't liking, because I'd be like, oh, I already invested this much. I need to finish it, because then I'm like wasting these pages because I need to get more books accomplished to like reach my 100 book goal. I felt resentful of longer books, or would sometimes like read shorter books so that I could like get the number up, which is just so stupid. Like that's not the point of reading. I just would love to hear like other alternative ways people track their reading and push themselves to read more, but not in like a destructive way. My plan to begin with, to sort of improve this for next year, is to massively lower my Goodreads reading goal for the year, so I just don't feel that same pressure. And the other thing I've started doing is I've started like a reading diary where I put in a little bit more notes every time I read something. Nothing super intense. If I read something that day, I'll just jot down a sentence or two about, you know, what I thought or something I found that was interesting. I want to be able to remember and take more with me moving forward from the books that I'm reading, and having like a little reading diary that, you know, maybe recaps like how I'm feeling or interesting things that I'm learning just feels like a more useful way to approach getting more out of the reading that I'm doing than just being completely determined to read as many books as possible. So how do you feel about reading goals? Do you have reading goals? Did I convince you to read any of these books? Do you have Goodreads alternatives? Because I'd be super open to that. Do you have any books to recommend to me? I would obviously love to hear those. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your 2024 and happy reading. I'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye.